So if we would like to figure out the confidence interval for population proportion, and before we go back to our beads, I just would like to remind you the general formula for confidence intervals. When we're talking about confidence intervals, the statistic is what we're building our confidence interval about, okay? And then one time we subtract the margin of error, one time we add the margin of error. And the margin of error is built, so this whole business over here, this whole bit over here is the margin of error. Okay, it is built of the critical value, okay, how far away in terms of standard deviations do I need to step, and what is the actual size of my standard deviation, okay? And a little bit quicker, if we were to use our if we were to use our sample proportion, okay, then we would talk the sample statistic, our point estimate, is actually going to be our p hat, okay? Our critical value, our critical value is actually going to be z, okay? So critical value z, okay, or z of alpha over 2, which is what our book is using, and then times the standard deviation of the statistic. So this is where our p hat q hat over n inside a square root comes in, okay? And this is how we're going to be constructing our confidence interval. So really quickly, let's go ahead and construct our confidence interval for our beads. Remember, we wanted the confidence interval for the number of pink beads, not in this little sample, but in this whole bucket. Okay, so when we're talking about, when we're talking about our whole bucket, I don't want to sit down there and count all the pink beads, even though my kids really love pink beads. But what I'm going to do, I'm going to take this little sample over here, and I'm going to calculate what is going to be the most likely confidence interval, and I'm going to make this over here that I am interested in 95% confidence interval, CI, confidence interval, for number of pink beads in the whole bucket, in the whole population. Okay, so let's remind us really quickly what we had there. Our proportion of pink beads was 15 out of 148. Would be nicer if it was just 150, but we didn't. So this is 0.101. Now, this is proportion of successes. This is the proportion of pink beads. The proportion of not pink beads, or proportion of failures, is actually going to be 133 out of 148. And this is going to be 0.899. Okay, I also will remind you what we need here. We also need the n. The n over here was 148. Okay, and then from that, we built that our p hat, this is our p hat, that's what we would need here, and I would need my critical value z. Please remind me what would be a critical value z for 95% confidence interval. Okay, if you think that it should be somewhere around 2, you are pretty right. It should be 1.96. So now that I have all this stuff, I can go ahead and calculate what is going to be my confidence interval. Now, if you remember from the previous video, we actually have calculated this entire unit over here, okay? And we have gotten that this thing was 0.0247, the PQ over N inside the square root. Okay, so my P hat turned out to be 0.0101 plus minus my critical value, 1.96, okay? And this whole business over here, the standard deviation of the statistic was 0.0247. Okay, so one time we're adding it, and one time we're subtracting it. And these are going to be the boundaries for our confidence interval. Okay, so going ahead and grabbing our calculator using this, one time we're subtracting the margin of error, one time we're adding the margin of error, we're ending up with the interval for the proportion of being somewhere between 0.05% to 0.0149. I'm going to round that to 1.5%. Okay, so that's not a lot of pink beads in there. Only between 5 and 15%. And this is why we have to go there and use some other color beads for our creations. And ladies and gentlemen, this is it for confidence interval for population proportion.